Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Success is a Choice podcasting network for our Coachable Coach series. This is where we talk about coaching and how it's not just about the X's and O's. But before we get into our great guest today, I want to remind you that our show, this episode, is brought to you by theleadershipplaybook.com. Great teams have great teammates. Theleadershipplaybook.com. Use coupon code CHOICE, as in success is a choice, and you'll get 25% off an annual membership at theleadershipplaybook.com. Stronger cultures, better teammates, positive leaders. Theleadershipplaybook.com. Today's guest, joining us today via Tuscaloosa, Alabama, is Coach Patrick Murphy. He's the Alabama softball coach. He's I could go down a long list. His resume is long. It's impressive, but essentially he has been there since the beginning. He has been the head coach there since 1999. He was an assistant when they established the program. He's a 2012 NCAA champion. He's also Alabama softball. When you think of Alabama softball, this is the guy. And I know that I can back that up because he was the first softball coach inducted into the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame. So that means he is softball. And I'm not having him on just because he's won a lot of games, but because every softball coach I talk to says this is the guy that knows how to build a program. So we are going to get the secret sauce today. Coach Murphy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. I want to know who you've been talking to. That's pretty nice. And thanks for the great introduction.
Absolutely. It is amazing. You know, I'm a basketball guy. I've been a basketball coach most of my life. And so I'm not as versed in every softball coach out there. You know, basketball, I know every basketball coach. I know the history of basketball. I don't know every team, every coach in softball, but I do know Alabama. And I had heard of you. And as the last year, talking with different softball coaches, your name always comes up. And it's like, all right, I know this guy wins a lot. And they're like, yeah, you know, almost everybody will say he just does things right with his program. So give us a little bit, a snapshot of your philosophy of coaching. Because obviously, you know, we think Alabama, we think 5-star athletes, Nick Saban type, you know, and you obviously get great athletes, but so do some of your competitors. So what makes you different?
I think number one, it's person first, athlete second. And we've been doing that from the very beginning. And I just firmly believe that how you start a program is by coaching the person first, and the athlete is way second. And once the young ladies truly understand that and believe that, the sky's the limit. And it's not something that you can just say one time in your first team meeting, you know, in August, and say, you know, it's going to be person first, athlete second. You have to continually show them, ask them questions, do things that, you know, will is geared towards person first. And I think one of the key ways to do that is always start with the heart also first. And I was lucky enough, it was probably 22, 23 years ago. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called, it's a leadership development course for teachers called Capturing Kids' Hearts. And my cousin, Chris Bingston, who's a kindergarten teacher in Iowa, probably for 40 years, went to this seminar, and she called me right away and she said, Patrick, you need to go to one of these. This is right exactly where you are as a person and a coach. And so I looked it up, and that summer after we were done, I flew over to Houston, Texas, and went to this 3-day conference. And it was life-changing. It really was. And it's a gentleman that started it. His name is Flippin. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Jamy, but I'll never forget his name. He actually wrote a book called The Flip Side, and educational psychologist. But his whole premise was, in order to get a kid to learn, to behave, to do whatever, is you have to capture the heart first. And then everything else falls into place. And I 100% truly believe it. And if you were to come out to a practice or a team meeting or whatever, I hope that you would say, wow, he really does care about them first as a person. And
so how does that kind of manifest itself? Because you hear, and you hear a cynical fan or even a coach say, well, yeah, I hear Nick Saban say it's about the process, or I hear, Coach Murphy say it's about the people first, but he's got 4-star, 5-star athlete talent. Every year he's getting the best of the best. It's easy to say that when you have all those athletes. How do you counter that? How do you talk to a young coach or a coach who's maybe in a rut about, maybe if you did it differently, you would get out of that rut?
I know. And that's probably the first thing that somebody will say to me too, after a conference or after a speech at a coach's clinic or a convention. And they say exactly what you just said. You've been here for 27 years. They're not going to fire you, right? Well, I would still do it that way, because you and I, you on the basketball side, you and I could both probably come up with at least 10 to 15 coaches that won a championship maybe last year, or are going to win a championship this year, and 2 years later are going to get fired. Right? And it was all about the player first. I got to win. I got to get a ring, whatever it might be. But they did so many things with shortcuts. It was not about the person first. It was probably about something illegal or whatever. And it's not worth it. And I can say that. I've been at the same school for 27 years. A couple years ago, I had won a 1,000th game at Alabama. And one of my buddies in college baseball is Butch Thompson, who's the baseball coach at Auburn. And whenever I know the baseball coach of another school, and I'm looking out my office right here in Coleman Coliseum, and I can see the baseball field, and I'm a huge baseball fan, pro, college, whatever. And I'll go to say hi to the guys that I know. And so I kind of yelled at somebody in the dugout, and Butch came over, and he's like, dude, 1,000 wins. What the hell? How do you do that? At one school. And, I didn't think about it. And the first thing that came to my mind, Jamy, was I said, be nice to everybody. Just be nice to everybody, because, you're going to have those off years. You will. But if you're a jerk and you have an off year, it's real easy to get rid of you and say, that dude's a jerk. We need to get rid of him. Right. But if you do things the right way, never burn a bridge, always see the bigger picture in mind. It's about graduating kids. It's not about really wins, rings. But if you do things the right way from the very beginning, consistently, that's the way to do it.
Well, you're at Alabama, and, lots of coaches go to conferences, clinics, professional development. You have professional development down your hallway or in the other building or next door to you constantly at Alabama. And this series is entitled Coachable Coach. A lot of coaches out there aren't coachable. They don't want to grow. They don't want to improve. They want to stay where they are, do what they've always done. Talk about how you utilize other coaches. You mentioned you love baseball. How do you utilize the other coaches to learn?
Well, number one, I love the title. Perfect. Seriously. You need to be a lifelong learner. And especially in, I don't care what it is, what division, NAIA, JUCO, whatever. There's always going to be really, really good people. And if you don't consistently learn and new things, you're going to get run over by the competition. I mean, that's 100% true. SEC, Big Ten. I mean, come on. You have to adjust, adapt, and learn every year. And one of the things that I absolutely loved prior to COVID was I would pick a conference every summer that had nothing to do with softball. And the one that I went to the summer before COVID was actually in Philadelphia. And it was Angela Duckworth, who wrote the book Grit. And it's one of my favorite people in the world. And I just, I constantly Google like conferences, servant leadership, things that we promote in our program. And it came up, and it was Philadelphia, and it was like maybe a 2.5 day or a day and a half. And also looked up, and the Phillies were in town, so that helped. And because you know what I did after the conference, but it was incredible, and it was educators, elementary, junior high, high school, some college people, but very few people in intercollegiate athletics. And I'm sitting at a round table with 10 people, and 8 of them are elementary teachers. 1 was a high school teacher, and it was me. And just things like that. And like the conference in Texas, it was 60 junior high, high school, and elementary teachers and me, 59-1. But those things is like, you learn a lot about human behavior, leadership, character development, all the things that really, to me, truly matter. And, if you go to a conference or a clinic, let's say in basketball or baseball, and in the middle of the program, there's the speaker is going to talk about maybe culture or team building or something like that. You know what usually happens? Half the room leaves. They go check out the exhibit hall. And when that happens, I move up to the front row. And I remember the first time I was at the ABCA, the Baseball Coaches Convention, and it was in Philadelphia, actually. And it was somebody from the Philadelphia Phillies. It was like a executive level person. And he was going to talk about the fish philosophy. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
The Pike Street Market, fish market in Seattle?
Okay, yes.
He actually did a business type video about these guys and how they interacted with the people. And it was brilliant. And I was early on in my career, and I literally looked around the room, and there was like 50 people. And as I flew home that Sunday afternoon, the most beneficial speech in the whole conference was that one, and it was probably the least attended. And I was just thrilled to death to hear something like that at a baseball coaches conference. And I was like, man, you can build better humans, but also build better softball players. It's possible, and I'm going to do it.
Well, as the guy that speaks about teamwork and leadership and culture, I know what it's like to have that room clear out when you're the one that comes up to speak at these clinics. Everyone wants to go get the latest, fad or the X's and O's, and most coaches know those X's and O's, but it's that's not what makes the difference on your team a lot of times. And that's not, when we go late nights to IHOP or Waffle House, you're not banging your head against the table or the wall because, your kids just don't have the X's and O's. It's almost always our kids are soft, or they're idiots, or they're selfish, or they're this or that. And yet we don't focus on that as coaches too much.
Yeah. And I wish more high schools, junior high, elementaries would do a little bit more in character education. And I think it's coming. I think there's a professor at Alabama that's friends with me, and we go to the same gym, and we are going to collaborate on something to help all the county schools, the city schools in Tuscaloosa. And he's already got proven success at his previous school. So to me, that's why you coach, right? You're building better people for 40, 45 years after they're done with the sport. They're going to play college softball for 4 years, but they're going to be a human being for another 50, 60, whatever it might be. So that the game of life outlasts baseball, softball, basketball by a long shot. So why wouldn't you spend a little more time on developing the person rather than just continually do drills or whatever with your team? And then back to the question about what do I do in the fall? I think softball is the perfect time of the year. I'm pointing on this side of the street, and that's Nick Saban's office. And one of the coolest things being here, obviously, you already said it, where there's basically a coaching clinic every press conference that he has. Mm-hmm. And I watch, I listen, I read the newspaper, I get on YouTube, whoever has his press conference, I watch it. down the hall this way is Wes Hart, who coached Alabama soccer to the Final Four this fall. Absolutely love watching his team, what they did. It was incredible. They went undefeated in the SEC, went undefeated at home. And I actually got to go on a road trip with them to BYU and Utah Valley. And it was just really, really special because I got to know some of the team, and I became their number one fan. But playing in the spring, you get to, I don't want to say use, but you get to have the benefit of learning. Our two cross country, men's and women's, they both won the SEC. Volleyball, soccer, football. You get to see what these fall teams do, and then hopefully learn from all of them so you don't make the same mistakes maybe in the spring.
Well, that's a great point too. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a Nick Saban. You don't have to have a Nate Oates that you're watching their press conferences, but you could be at a high school and just see the way that, the volleyball coach handles their pre-practice routine, or the way that they handle after practice, or whatever it is. You could pick one nugget up that could maybe help you be a better coach as well. You mentioned, we've talked about you doing extra stuff. You're not just all about the X's and O's. What are some things that you do that are intentional to, and I hate even calling them team building activities, because too oftentimes we talk about team building and it's checking a box. Hey, I did this in August. Hey, I did this in January. So we check the box. But what are some intentional things that you do to facilitate your team maybe coming together a little quicker than they might otherwise?
I'll give you an example we just did about 3 weeks ago. And we usually do it the week of Thanksgiving, but they changed our academic calendar. So we did it the week before, because the whole week of Thanksgiving we were off. But it's called Gratitude Week. And it usually coincides with Thanksgiving. You're thankful. To whom much is given, much is expected in return, right? So I would absolutely just be devastated if somebody was entitled in my program. I cannot stand that. And we are going to be thankful for everything and everything we get. So the activity goes something like this. There is a video that I'm a huge collector of life lessons and videos and YouTube and stuff like that. And we have a classroom in our building, and, we have assigned seats at the beginning of the year. So you stay in that seat for the rest of the year. And almost every day before practice, they come into the classroom, they sit down, everybody's got a notebook, a pen, ready to go. And we might have a speaker. We could have you, we could have Nick Saban's come. We've had Nate Oates. We've had, tons of coaches at Alabama, compliance meetings, stuff like that. So they're in their seat, and they know it's Gratitude Week. So I show this video that I found from Soul Pancake. It's YouTube, and it's the science of happiness. And basically study after study after study has shown that the happier you are, the more gratitude you show. So the more gratitude that you show or say, you become happier. And it's about a 7-minute video. And, they talk about that, and they ask for volunteers to come into this testing site, and they actually test them to see how happy they are. And then they ask them to write a letter to someone that they've never had an opportunity to say exactly what they want to say to them in terms of thank you, what you helped me in my life, you helped me in my career, you helped me in my sport, whatever it might be. Just pick one person. So then they write this letter, and the gentleman that's running this experiment has now one person at a time in this room, and there's a table and a chair. So the person sits down at the table, and then he says, "Okay, you're done with your letter, correct, Jamy?"
Yep.
And then he says, "Okay, we're going to have you call that person, and you're going to read your letter to them." And when I say this is probably one of the most powerful, vulnerable things that we do, it is. And so they watch this video, and then when we get done, I said, everybody's got a pen and a paper, right? And I know that they do, because it's all on their little desks. And I said, let's us write a letter to someone, anybody, mom, dad, brother, sister, coach, teacher, whoever, teammate. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to play some music, and I put on some U2. And I said, okay, when the music starts, you start your letter. And then when the song ends, I'm going to say stop. So everybody's writing. The end of the song, I kind of look up to make sure everybody's done, and they were. And I said, okay, cool. I said, now I'm not going to attempt to ask everybody to come up here. And then we bring in this desk and this chair. And now the energy in the room changes a little bit because they know what's about to happen. I asked for a volunteer to come up to the front of the room and read their letter over speaker on their phone. So, and I say it really gently because it's a huge deal, right? And a lot of times, I don't know if you have a daughter, but the daddy-daughter relationship in softball is so strong. And a lot of times the young lady will write the letter to her dad. Mm. And it is just one unbelievable conversation, because the dad's holding back tears. The daughter's probably already crying. And then you know who else cries? The entire team, because we're hearing this whole thing in front of everybody. And it is one of the coolest days of the year. And we don't pick up a ball. We don't pick up a bat, but it's one of the best things that we do that draws people together, because they remember that day for the rest of their lives. And, you know, one of the coolest things about it is, yes, if I wrote the letter, I'm happier. If you receive the call, you are happier. But you know what the coolest thing is, Jamy? Everybody in the room that listens to the conversation is happier. They weren't even involved, right? So you leave that, and it's like 35, 40 minutes. It's not a 2-hour thing. That was literally our practice that day. But you leave the room feeling like you could conquer anything and everything in the world. So it is one of my favorite days of the year. And truly, it's, you know, like the next day, I got a text message from one of the dads. And he's like, Coach, that was incredible. That was the best phone call I've ever gotten in my life. And, you know, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just a cool thing to experience.
Well, as I listen to you tell that story and talk about that, and especially when you say that was our practice for the day, I think of two things. One is, so many coaches take their X's and O's time or their practice time as sacred. Hey, we have got to spend all this time in the cage or all this time doing X, Y, or Z. And they forget that sometimes the stuff you just talked about will go a whole lot farther than one extra day. But then the second thing I thought about was, oftentimes we talked earlier about checking a box. There will be a coach that listens to this and tries to implement exactly what you just did to check that box, but then they won't follow up. They won't live out that moving forward each day. That doesn't become them. It just becomes one thing that they did.
Right. And then, you know, one of the other things that we try to move that along kind of like is, throughout the year when we go on the road, I say, I want my team to be talked about in a special way by the other team's grounds crew, by the other team's media, by the other team's coaches. So we were going to be the most polite, gracious. We're going to pick up every piece of trash in the dugout. I mean, the whole thing. And we use a thing we call speak it into existence. And so another thing that we did this fall was, each kid had to come up to the front of the room and say out loud a quote that she wants another coach to say about her at the end of a game. And I did one too. And you know, one of my things is, I want to be known as the classiest, nicest team in Division I softball. And so then when somebody does say, Murph, your team, oh my gosh, the first thing I do the next day that the team is around, I tell them that story, because I just affirm the behavior that I want them to have. You affirmed it to me, but I'm going to affirm to them. Jamy says this. He just spoke it into existence. That's what we were trying for. You did it. So now, instead of it's, you know, like mom and dad telling me to do this, you know, I don't want to do it, do what mom and dad do, you know, all that. Then it becomes from somebody else. And you affirm the behavior that I wanted. And then it's like, okay, this is cool.
Well, you've had tremendous success, obviously, and you have a culture and environment of one competitiveness. I mean, your athletes are competing against each other. They're all highly recruited, but you also have this amazing culture of team. And that almost plays against each other sometimes, or it seems like it would go against each other. I coach basketball. If I have two great point guards, I can still get them on the court at the same time. It's more fluid. If you've got a great shortstop, they're not going to go over and play first base often, so to speak. I'm simplifying it. Or if Nick Saban has two great quarterbacks, it's hard to get them both on the field. How do you balance that and get that so that they're teammates, they care about each other, but also they're competitive as heck?
It's one of the hardest things, and that was one of the best questions I've ever gotten on a podcast. So let's say you're in 8th grade, okay, and all those rankings that you're number 3 in the country, okay. Well, for the next 5 years, Jamy, you are told that you are a stud, you're the best, all this by everybody. Then you come to college at Alabama and you're on my team, and I say, the sooner you realize it's not all about you, the better off in life you're going to be. Imagine you're like, what is he saying? Wait a minute. Everybody said I'm a stud, and I'm the stud. So everybody on the team now, though, has hit number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4 in their lineup since they were 6 years old. There's a room full of leadoff hitters or 3-hole hitters. Everybody's Aaron Judge, but only 9 people get to start. Now, how does that happen? How do the other 11 or 10 or 12, what happens to them? So everybody is needed, wanted, but most of all appreciated. What you bring to the table is special, and only you and you can do it. Just you. Whatever you bring to the table is special, and you are on this team for a reason. Maybe we don't know what that reason is right now, but there will be a reason that you are on this team. And I guarantee you, Jamy, that you will help us win a game this year. Somehow, some way, you will win us a game, whether you play or not. So now it's a constant of affirmation of everybody's role. And and it's so easy now with the portal, and basketball is probably one of the worst. I think it's 48% of men's basketball players transfer now. 48. So half the guys in Division I basketball will transfer. So how do you get a young person to believe that you don't have to play, but you can still help the team win? That's like one of my greatest goals of a year. And you get the players to believe it. My coaching staff believes it. But when you can get a stud to affirm the behavior of a role player and tell that kid that you helped us win this game, their role on the team is now affirmed. Like, I don't have to play to help us win. They just said that. And it's one of the coolest things when it does happen. And it's getting harder and harder to, make a kid realize or believe that they are needed, wanted, but most of all appreciated for what they bring to the table. It's a difficult thing, but when it happens, it's just like, wow.
And it's going to be a consistent thing too, from a coaching staff, from that the kids, you're not just saying that, because coaches talk all the time. They can say a lot of things, but do they back that up time after time after time so that their athletes trust them?
Right. Yep. And some of my favorite people in the world are kids that never played to this day. I've been here for 27 years. I can tell you that every kid that ever played here, what they're doing, if they're married, if they have kids, what their job is, I'm serious. And we keep in contact with everybody because I've been here since day one. So I can tell you every roster for 27 years. And I think that's one of the coolest things about, being at Alabama is I was here from day one.
Well, and I know you have plenty and plenty of stories you could talk about with role players, or talk about how the team came together, had each other's backs. Not all of our listeners will be familiar with one of the more famous stories. And I know I could say, go Google this, but I would rather people hear it from you talking about the Brittany Rogers story from years ago. But it's indicative of your culture, your program, but it's just an amazing story that can build each year that kids see this. This is obviously the one of those that was out front and it got more exposure than other stories. But I'm sure you could tell other stories as well, but if you would share a little bit about the Brittany Rogers story.
Yeah, it was 2009 at the College World Series. And at the time, I would always say, if you can be as happy for a teammate's success as if you did it yourself, the sky's the limit. Okay. I would say that over and over and over, every game, every practice. Okay. I didn't know that there was a word for it. And that word is mudita. And I didn't learn that word until 2013. And it's M-U-D-I-T-A. And that's the definition, is having vicarious joy in someone else's success. So we're at the World Series. It's an elimination game playing Arizona State. We're down 2-0, bottom of the fourth, bases loaded, 2 outs. Brittany Rogers is up to bat. She's a 4-time All-American slapper. And a slapper in softball, basically all she does is put the ball in play and run like hell and hope that they either throw it away or she beats it out. Well, that year, with the bases loaded, she tried to do too much. And she would roll over the ball to second base or first base. Well, my mom could make that play, and we needed some runs. So I called timeout. I go to Brittany Rogers. I say, hey, Jazz is going to pinch hit for you. Go tell her she can do it. 2 words came out of Brittany Rogers' mouth. Yes, sir. No, like eye roll. No, like, are you kidding me? I'm a 4-time All-American. Nothing. So then as a coach, I was like, all right, and I knew that was going to be the reaction anyway, but she just affirmed what I knew about her. So then I have to go over to the dugout and I say, Jazz, get a helmet on. You're going to hit for Brittany. She's a freshman from Northport, Alabama, which is 10 minutes away from campus. Clueless of the game, right? Which is good. So she goes to get her helmet and her batting gloves. And as she's going up the dugout steps, guess who meets her? Brittany Rogers. Brittany Rogers actually puts her hands on her shoulders and says, you got this, Jazz. You can do this. Well, I don't know if you've ever coached females, but a typical response might be that the kid that's getting pinch hit for walks directly to the end of the dugout, gets her Gatorade, and stands in the corner and ignores the kid that's hitting for her, right? And then the kid that's now, that young lady is like, oh, Brittany hates me. She didn't say a word to me, right? That's going through her head. The exact opposite. Jazz says, oh, thank God. Brittany's not mad at me. I'm good, right?
Yep.
So she gets up to bat, and Brittany Rogers becomes the best cheerleader in the world at the top step of the dugout. She could have pouted. She could have been Debbie the Downer. She's outside the dugout cheering, screaming, yelling for the kid that's hitting for her. And I don't want to give everything away, but I guess I have to. But on like the 9th pitch, Jazz Lunsford hits an opposite field grand slam. As I'm telling the story, Jamie, I've got goosebumps. My heart is beating. And I've never heard a crowd that loud. There was 12,000 people that night in Oklahoma City, and it was just electric. The first person out to home plate was Brittany Rogers, jumping like you wouldn't believe, just as happy as she could be, as if she did it herself. Mudita. So Jazz comes around the corner and she inches her way into home plate, and there's a whole scrum of her teammates there going nuts. Well, one of the coolest parts of all this was I'm coaching in the game, right? But the game is live on TV, on ESPN. And I have a buddy in Georgia that's a high school coach, and Georgia high school softball plays in the fall. We get back from the World Series. We win that game. We get back from the World Series, and he emails me and says, hey, Murph, do you have the film from the Arizona State game? And I said, yeah, we get a DVD. At the time, it was a DVD. Will you send it to me? And I said, sure. And when we're done, Jamie, I don't go back and watch anything.
Okay.
So I find the DVD on my desk and I send it to him. About a month and a half later, here comes a package from Georgia. And it's 2 DVDs. One is the original, and then another one, and it says Anatomy of a Teammate, and it's a DVD. And right at my computer, I had a DVD player. So I'm literally sitting at my desk like I am right now. I put that DVD in the DVD player, and here comes this, and it says Anatomy of a Teammate. And he has done this whole video about what a great teammate looks like, acts like. And it's the Jazz and Brittany story on a DVD, and it's now on YouTube. And trust me when I say this, because it's the honest to God truth, is when I speak at coaches clinics, that's the number one thing that people still want to talk about. It happened in 2009. A couple years ago, it was the 25th anniversary of the Women's College World Series, and it was voted as the 10th best moment of all time at the Women's College World Series. And I mean, it was, and like 2000, a couple years ago, we had the 10th anniversary of it here, and we invited Brittany and Jazz back, and people still just can't have enough of it. Obviously, it's one of the coolest moments of my career, not because she hit the grand slam, but because of the reaction of the 4-time All-American. And she was okay with getting pinch hit for, because most kids probably wouldn't be. And she was the greatest teammate in the world at that moment.
When you were trailing in that game, and conceivably that could have been Brittany Rogers' last at bat.
It would have been it. Yep.
And so she's getting pinch hit, saying essentially somebody else can do the job, you can't, or however you want to take it.
Yes.
You're never going to play again after this, or you're never going to hit again after this at bat. And she took it that way. And we will link that video in the show notes, because it's worth watching, and to see the genuine enthusiasm. Like, you can't fake that. She was not faking she was genuinely excited. And I love what you said, when you're genuinely excited about your teammates, almost like it's yours. You were doing it.
I'm really glad you used that word, because I am a teacher education grad from the University of Northern Iowa, and one of my foundations of teaching education classes, the professor told us, and I can remember, this was 1988. He said, first graders know when their teachers are fake. First graders. So I tell my team that every year. So if you cheer for a teammate and you're faking it, will she realize it? Yes. It needs to be genuine. And that's the word you used it twice. And I appreciate that so much, because people are going to see when you're faking. It needs to be genuine. And when you have genuine mudita, wow, that's life-changing as a team.
Well, let's wrap it up with last question. Just, if you've had awesome insights, awesome nuggets. I hope coaches were taking notes about this. Go back, listen to this again. But if you have any more, obviously you have lots of nuggets, but what advice, what parting shots? This is the post-game speech, so to speak, for those coaches, those leaders listening to this, just to get them out on another high note.
Well, I would still come back to, if I had to do it all over again, I would still be person first, athlete second. Ask them about their family, ask them about their classes, ask them about their outside activities, ask them about anything other than softball. And do it frequently, okay? Because they are going to start to realize that this coach cares about me first as a person. And when they do, wow, I'm telling you, it will be a life-changing moment for both sides, the athlete and the coach. And take it from me, it is the coolest part of coaching. You know, this fall I went to 3 weddings of, former players, and nothing cooler than going to, it's the biggest day of their life, right? And you get invited to their wedding. And I've always said that if I get invited, I'm going, because it is the biggest day of her life up to that point. That's the reward of being a coach.